Did you always see yourself building something in the verification space after Adepto, or was this just sort of stars aligning with right timing?
You could do a hell of a lot with a few generalists that all have that kind of founder mentality. And we provide instant employment verification in the UK, helping people to start their jobs sooner, helping to remove friction from the hiring process.
If other startups come in and want to play in this space, you're already 3, 4, 5 years ahead of them, seen millions of cases.
We're only successful if they really get value out of the product. If I could talk to myself at the very beginning, I would probably say
hello everyone, and welcome to What the FTE, the podcast tackling the big questions about the future of work, risk management, and employee experience. I'm your host, Donald Green, and today I'm delighted to be joined by Chris Milligan, founder and CEO of Konfir. Chris, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Donald. It's good to be here.
Chris, for anyone who hasn't come across Konfir yet, what's the elevator pitch in your own words?
So we provide instant employment verification in the UK. What that effectively means is helping people to start their jobs sooner, helping to remove friction from the hiring process, and helping employers to onboard and reduce the time to hire.
Okay, so just for context, employment verification before becoming instant with companies like Konfir, what did that process look like?
Yeah, so if you go back 20, 30 years, employment verification was having to check, does someone work where they said they worked? Really confirming their CV, if you will. And that would have originally been phone calls, calling your previous employer and checking, did you work where you said you worked? It then evolved to faxes. Really, as technology evolves, so does employment screening. Faxes and then emails. And really, emails was the pervasive way of conducting these checks where you have to wait for the employer to reply to that email. Everyone's been through that in their life in some way, shape or form, moving jobs. It happens when you're moving house and getting a financial product as well. And so as technology further evolved, we realized this data was actually available in core systems that could be accessed instantly rather than waiting for replies to emails. Those replies take days to weeks, but often go unanswered as well. And so it's become really the last difficulty in the hiring process. And so we kind of set out just to focus on how do we improve that with the new technology.
Awesome. So that takes that verification process from potentially weeks, like I've seen 6 weeks, 8 weeks not be uncommon in the past, down to what you say is instant. So is instant like an hour, or is it literally like milliseconds to make an API call?
It's milliseconds. So the way that it works is the applicant connects their different data based on the data sources that can show and demonstrate where someone has worked, and there's a number of those. And as soon as they do that, the data is then pulled back, run through different models and algorithms to present the truth and the true picture. So it can rapidly reduce the turnaround times based on comparing it to emails.
So fundamentally, it's getting candidates in seats much faster than previously, where you need to wait that 5 or 6 week period in some cases, right?
Yeah, I mean, the employment verification part of the screening process, the end-to-end process, with the introductions of digital ID over the last few years, right to work checks and other digital checks have meant that employment verification is the longest piece, and was kind of holding up the whole onboarding. And so now you can really be way a lot faster in that, and that effectively means that everything can be brought forward. And we see it be used as well as like a check up front, maybe while you still look for references. It's not necessarily a complete replacement of references. It can be used in different industries for a range of different models.
Awesome. Now before you founded Konfir, you founded Adepto, a company that was acquired by Degreed, I think back in 2019. What did Adepto do, and what led up to its acquisition?
Yeah, so Adepto was kind of a personal experience I had out of university, actually, in Australia, where I was a contractor and I decided not to go into the graduate programs. It was a time where being a gig worker wasn't mainstream. It wasn't cool. It was kind of where Upwork and those platforms were emerging. And the recruiters that I was talking to at the time were struggling to understand how, a 20-year-old was a contractor or a consultant and how that all fitted in. So I kind of couldn't find the next thing. And I thought, there's got to be a better way to help these people get access to organizations. And so started Adepto, which began as a contractor marketplace where you could find opportunities. And then we handled all the payroll on the back end, and then evolved into just being a pure software SaaS provider where we would go to businesses like PwC and AECOM and give them what you would describe as a private LinkedIn network, a talent pool. And then those organizations would invite employees, they would invite contractors and alumni. And anytime a piece of work came up, they would put it into their systems, and Adepto would say, this is Donald. He already knows how to, run a tech company, or he knows this about this, his is availability. And then that was acquired by Degreed because we started to map skills, and skills became the currency of what people's capability was. And Degreed is a learning business that was all about developing skills. So the supply of skills and developing skills fit really nicely together. So we did that in 2019.
So your previous startup was in the HR and recruitment space, and you've decided to go again in the same space, but a slightly different take on it. What was the original spark moment that made you decide to build Konfir?
So in that journey with Adepto and Degreed, I had, as we were integrating to vendor management systems, HR systems, applicant tracking systems, started to see the HR data that is stuck, I guess, in these organizations, and how valuable it can be for the person, the candidate themselves, and for other employers. In North America, there were businesses at the time starting like Argyle and TrueWork that was now, acquired by Checker. And there's others that were starting to see that data and look at it for different use cases. And so after I'd been at Degreed for a couple of years, I thought, right, these guys don't need me anymore. I'm going to look at what's next. And the UK at that point, open banking, as far as access to data and consumer consent, was pretty well developed. The UK is the world leader in open banking adoption. You'd also seen GDPR be in place now for a while, so individuals knew their rights, and organizations were used to relying on that kind of data. But the employment verification screening industry really hadn't evolved in that part of the process. So we decided that we'd just focus on that using, I guess, what we'd learned and the data that was available and pull that together. So we kicked off really in 2022. And so it's been 3 years.
And did you always see yourself building something in the verification space after Adepto, or was this just sort of the stars aligning with right timing and right problem statement in the market?
Yeah, it was definitely the stars aligning. It was in COVID, and I was in lockdown, and I found myself trying to avoid lockdowns, and I was in Sofia in Bulgaria for 6 weeks just by myself, and I thought, I've got all this spare time, I'll start the next one. And I started doing research on kind of what the market opportunity was, and also applying the learnings from, I guess, Adepto. So Konfir is a very different proposition, whereas Adepto was a more pure play SaaS company where we would sell, an annual contract based on number of users, whereas Konfir is much more of a success-based model. It's all about verifications. It's all about volumes. It's kind of very akin to the way that AI agents and the pricing of usage is becoming more common. And so that was very different. That took a kind of bit of figuring out how that works. But I think it means we partner a lot more closely with our clients because, we're only successful if they really get value out of the product, and it's more embedded and it's kind of a core part of the process. So it's been a great journey, but it's been a very iterative journey. It wasn't started with the end in mind, unfortunately.
Yeah. Okay. So maybe let's get into the Konfir platform itself. How does it actually work under the hood? What's going on?
Yeah. So what we provide to our clients being background screening companies like Certain, and you have access to the ability to create requests, and that can happen on a web application or via an API. The API integrated into your existing journey. You'll input applicants or candidates' details into that. They'll generally, as the industry is used to, have declared employment. So someone will say, here's all the places I worked. I had gaps in these periods of time, and that will be input into the Konfir platform. The applicant will then be invited to go through Konfir in a journey that asks them if they want to connect their open banking in the UK, so they connect to their bank account. That covers about 94% of the population. We see 80% people connect to their bank and pull that data back. And what we're doing with banking is looking for transaction information that demonstrate employment. So we've built models that understand all the employers in the UK and what transaction reference strings are used. So based on that, we know where you work, and also based on pay dates, when you started and if you're still there. We'll also look at things like benefits, because a lot of gap in employment needs to be verified through benefits, and checking that, if you said you're on job seekers allowance or students allowance, or there's a number of them, we can demonstrate that, which saves a lot of time. So that's banking. The second option in the journey is payroll. So an individual can, with one click, say, I'm happy for Konfir to pull their payroll record. And we've got access to 80% of the PAYE payroll population in the UK. And so using some PII, we can just call that and pull back current employment, sometimes job titles included in that. And the third is an integration to HMRC, where again, the individual is redirected to their HMRC government gateway, and they log into that and they share up to 5 years of employment data. And we're about to introduce a self-employment document check. So people can go through all of those. 80% of people will connect 2 or more of those data sources. All that data comes back into Konfir. We process it, and we then present a report that says, this is Chris. He said he worked in all these places. And this is Chris, our verified version of that. This is confirmed. This is slightly different. These dates are different. Actually, we found an undeclared employment that Chris didn't mention. These gaps are true. And that happens within a matter of minutes, basically. As long as the individual's connected the data, it'll come back and we'll present the result back.
So that's fundamentally how Konfir is different than just connecting to a HMRC data source. It's layering in those additional checks and having more than one factor in building the profile of the candidate, right?
Yeah, so what's really important for us is to go broad. We need to be able to verify as many people as we can. Otherwise, it's not that effective for our customers. So having the different data sources means that you've got a broader data coverage. So that will help with conversion, because some people might be more comfortable with others. It also is important to have multiple data sources, because each data source has different data and tells a different story. Banking, for example, shows off payroll work. It can also show those benefits and other insights. Payroll data can give job title. HMRC data goes historical, because employers report to it. But having all of that means you can then consolidate and get the most comprehensive report available. Also, each of those data sources is disparate in the way they label things. So, Konfir as an employer will be potentially called slightly different things in each of those data sources. And so what can happen if you just rely on one of those is you end up having to do a load of data cleaning work and trying to understand how entities relate. If you imagine name changes, mergers and acquisitions, subsidiary and parent relationships, candidates just misspelling where they work, contractors saying they work at the end client, but actually they're employed by the recruiter. All of these scenarios happen. And so what we do when we process that data is we run it through different models. We've got an employer database that we link it to give our clients a really simple answer, so that our clients' teams don't then have to look at it and do further research on the reports.
So do you have your own sort of machine learning algorithm working behind the scenes, and then learning from the client data or the cases that get processed, which I guess gets more accurate over time? Is that sort of how it works?
Yeah, that's how we started. So we started just with banking data, and then we introduced payroll data, and then HMRC was actually more recent. Each of those data sources tells a different story. So we've been able to evolve our understanding. For example, on banking, we've seen that many transactions now that we know, if you work for a major employer in the UK, we can identify which employer that is based on the transaction reference code, for example. Because we've seen that, and you've declared where you worked, and we've seen someone else who also declared they worked at McDonald's, and then you start to triangulate that data. So absolutely, that's how it works. The machine learning models is that. So we aren't making decisions. What we're doing is giving proof based on the data. This is true and correct. And then our clients will often make that end decision around, okay, with the rest of the checks that are being done, and then packaged up to the end client.
And does that give you a first mover advantage in the industry? I.e., like, if other startups come in and want to play in this space, you're already 3, 4, 5 years ahead of them, and you've seen millions of cases, whereas they're just starting, and their algorithms would not be as accurate as yours, and would be playing catch up essentially.
Certainly. So part of it is algorithms and data science. For sure, that's an advantage. The other advantage is the trust, I think, because we've been doing this for not all that long in the grand scheme of things, but a few years now. There's about 4,000 employers in the UK who have used it. Candidates then talk about that. If you go on to Reddit, you can see questions about Konfir. You can see a Trustpilot score. That breeds kind of an awareness of the check. And then what ends up happening is employers like Lloyd's Bank, for example, references Konfir in their screening policy. So it's a trusted source by one of the prestigious banks. So that'll help. And then you've got the compliance aspect. So we're certified under the trust framework in the UK, which is the Digital ID and Attributes Trust Framework. So there's a level of assurance that we've built. So yeah, I think all that goes into, first mover advantage. I think if we didn't see others trying to do what we're doing, I'd be worried because, maybe what we're doing isn't seen as a good idea. But there'll be competition for sure over time, as in any market. But we're happy that we've really changed the narrative in the UK for employment screening. And I think everyone sees the benefit of that now compared to a few years ago when we were talking about using open banking to verify employment. And a lot of people we spoke to were thinking, what are you talking about? How's that going to work? That sounds like really sensitive data. The conversation has moved on from that a lot.
So from a user perspective, this is a really simple platform or tool to use. It's one click in many cases. What was the hardest part when building the MVP or, the iterations after that of making it both compliant, but also super simple from a user perspective?
Was really the GDPR elements of it, because each of the data sources have slightly different legal constructs. Open banking is an authentication, so the individual has to log into their bank account. Now that is really seamless because the FCA has mandated that the banks make that possible and easy. But that's different then to the payroll construct and then the HMRC construct. And so making sure that we approach all that and balancing the ease of doing it with the transparency for the conversion, because it might be easy, but if people don't trust it, they're not going to try. And so over the last years, we've tested that journey a lot and A/B tested it. For example, there's a common view, I think, that product people have where less screens is better. But we introduced a screen as a test once where we said, here's what it was before banking. Here's what we're going to do with your data, and here's what we're not going to do with your data. And that was a net new screen. And we saw conversion go up after introducing that screen. And so there's lots of examples like that we've learned to try and get the journey as slick as possible. There's always work that we can do. There's always improvements we can do. And I guess that's what our team mostly focuses on is conversion and coverage, because we want to solve as many verifications as we can.
And what happens then when someone doesn't have a completely clean or a complete digital trail? How do we handle those exceptions?
So we solve for the UK, and that means that if someone's just moved here, we won't be able to cover for them. If someone's left for a period and come back, we won't be able to cover for them. Grand plan, obviously, is global domination as every business, but right now we want to fully solve the UK. So there's also scenarios where someone can't or doesn't want to go through the journey. The moment we verify a gross number, about 75% of all the employments that are put through. So that other 25%, they'll go back to our client where we'll say, look, we didn't get a result. Today, that'll fall back to documents or manual processes. And that's one of the reasons we're adding documents into the end of our journey, is because the candidate's already in our journey, it's already contextual. We already know where they said they've worked. There's an opportunity where we can say, okay, you haven't done that. That's fine. Upload a document and complete more of that picture. But that still won't be 100%. And so that'll fall back to our client teams to continue the processes they already have. And those processes are always going to be there because, as I said earlier, it's not that Konfir is a replacement for referencing or screening. In some cases, it is. In some standards, in some organizations, it's enough. In others, it's an add-on. It's give me the verification so I know this is true and correct, but I still want to go and talk to that employer. I want to check what the role was. There's regulated industries where that's still a requirement to get a letter with a letterhead from the previous employer, FCA regulated roles. So it does depend on the industry on how that can be implemented.
And you've started in the UK for obvious reasons. What are the markets or the geographies that would make sense for this type of solution, or actually possible based on the availability of data, etc.?
Yeah, great question. And it is really the availability of data and then the legal backstop to it. So countries that have a similar legal system to the UK from a data privacy perspective and have the same technology are easier. So some of those are Australia, not because I'm biased and I'm Australian, but that's one of them. And then you've got places like Singapore, India to a degree, Canada are all kind of in immediate scope. For us, I think, we would look east. There are options in the US and North America that have been around either from credit reference agencies or other companies that have recently been born like Konfir. So for us, it's probably looking at those markets like Singapore and Australia as a first start.
Maybe a couple of final questions before we wrap it up, coming sort of out of Konfir and more focusing on yourself and your entrepreneurial journey. If you could give one piece of advice to your younger self, perhaps when you were starting out at Adepto or even before that, what would it be?
I think if I could talk to myself at the very beginning, I would probably say that you're going to get through whatever the challenge that you're faced with is. And everyone's career, doesn't matter what you're doing. I think you see things and you learn and you have an experience and you overcome it and you start to build your self-belief in your capability. And there was a moment, I don't actually remember exactly when it was, where I kind of had that trigger moment and I thought, you know what, I'm going to see new problems, different problems, all sorts of things I can't predict, but I know that my framework, my approach to problem solving, my tenacity will mean that I can solve this and overcome it. And I think when I realized that, it reduced some, but not all, stress and anxiety from worrying if I'm going to solve the thing. And I think, running a business, managing a team, whatever that looks like for someone, if you could reduce some of that stress and anxiety and worry about what's to come, I think your life gets a little bit easier.
So what's something that you believe about building and scaling companies to be true now that you definitely didn't believe to be true, 5 years ago?
Hiring generalists who are happy to be generalists, that can thrive in ambiguity, that have a real bias to action and are technically capable. They don't have to be full stack engineers or fully technical, but understand products. I think you could build a lot with that now. You could really get off the ground. And I'm not saying, you need to build the next Lovable or this big AI company that's doing hundreds of millions very quickly. I mean, any business, you could do a hell of a lot with a few generalists that all have that kind of founder mentality, and you get together and you can stay pretty lean. And I think, when I founded my first business nearly 15 years ago, it was so different to that. Everything had like a specialism, and that wasn't that long ago.
Okay, final question from me then. What's next for you and Konfir over the next sort of 12 months or so? What can we expect to see and read about?
Yeah, so document processing is one that I mentioned. We're going to add that into the journey. We expect that to help with the verification rate and the coverage rate. Along that, we're introducing a new matching model called Clarity with a K. And what that will help to do is further improve the readability, the interpretation of our data, so that our clients can just automate. If it says it's good, just gets passed through. Those are the two key things. After that, what we're looking to do is think about how can we provide more insights and analytics back to our clients based on the data that their applicants are using as they go through the journey. And I think once we get that verification rate to over 90%, which will probably be next year, we then start to look at, okay, where else based on our clients makes sense for Konfir to go. So that's what's on our mind at the moment. And just continuing to scale out and do a lot of market education, because, while we sit here and talk about everyone who's using it, there's probably more organizations who aren't yet. So there's still a long way to go on talking to the market.
Well, Chris, it's been great having you on the podcast. Really appreciate you for coming on, giving us your time. We're big fans of Konfir here at Certain, so we wish you all the best for the next 12 months. And beyond that, we look forward to what's coming down the line. And it's any final comment you'd like to leave our listeners with?
If you have any questions about employment verification, obviously get in touch. But it's been great to speak to you, and look forward to also continuing our partnership on the Certain side. Thanks, Donald.